This is the World Organic News for the week ending 27th of November 2017. John Moore reporting. We begin this week with a look at honeybees. The story of bees in danger has been a constant in the blog since I started way back in 2014. Colony loss and colony collapse disorder have featured. From the blog, The Bulls and the Bees, comes the post, Plant Trees for the Bees. This is pretty much about what it says on the tin. Quote, apparently, colony collapse disorder is often confused with colony loss, and there is a misconception that they are synonymous with each other. Colony collapse disorder is when bees are healthy and buzzing around one day, and the next day they're gone from the hive. Cameron said there hasn't even been a report on colony collapse disorder since 2007. However, colony loss is still a very serious issue, and the bees are still dying from pesticides and parasites. The media often refers to colony loss as colony collapse disorder, so that is where the confusion has rooted from. He recommended non-beekeepers to help the bees by planting a tree or a plant of some sort that bees need to feed themselves and help increase pollination, end quote. The post has a list of useful trees to plant for bees, as well as fruits, vegetables, herbs, shrubs and annuals. Briefly, alder, hazelnut and maple stand out from the list of trees. They're not only useful for bees, but they have other uses: timber, food, syrup. In addition, I would add the pome fruits for bees. Pome fruits include apples, pears, quinces and locusts. I can remember springtimes in an ancient orchard on the place I lived on in the snowy mountains being so alive with bees, the sound was somewhat overwhelming. The promises of both fruit and honey were in that sound as the trees leapt into life after a long cold winter with the minus 15 degree C frost we received each year. Again, the pome fruits are at least dual return plants, honey and fruit. Additionally, the windfall fruits in autumn were also a sugar bump for the sheep prior to mating. The extra nutritional boost these fallen fruits provided the ewes was directly responsible for higher twinning rates, and so the trees provided a third benefit. As we are all well aware by now, there's more CO2 in the atmosphere than there was prior to the Industrial Revolution. This has some well-described negative impacts, but the blog, Daley Writes, points us to a positive effect we can take advantage of to both assist the bees and reduce the level of CO2. In a post entitled, Urban Tree Growth is Accelerating. Quote, the growth rate of urban trees is speeding up worldwide according to a study, link in the show notes, published in Scientific Reports. Trees in urban areas are growing up to 25% faster than those in rural areas and have been experiencing accelerated growth since the 1960s, end quote. So what we have here is a way to reduce urban heat islands, provide feed for bees, provide food for humans and reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. A win-win-win-win situation. By taking advantage of this 25% boost to tree growth, we can more quickly start providing alternative feed options for bees. This not only is good for the bees, but the increased CO2 driving the increased tree growth will be sequestered in those trees. True enough, to have a measurable effect on atmospheric CO2, we would have to undertake massive tree plantings across urban settings worldwide. This, though, would not be a bad thing. With the correct choice of tree per location, we could provide sufficient mulch to support or at least to commence urban farming enterprises. All that mulch for raised beds, all that carbon hidden in the soils where it does good for both us and our annual food plants, all from taking advantage of a positive side effect of climate change. Whilst we are on the idea of capturing CO2, we have a post from the blog Make Wealth History entitled 5 Uses for Captured CO2. Now, the idea of capturing CO2 has been a dream of the fossil fuel industry for a couple of decades. This has led to such oxymoronic terms as clean coal. This involves both CO2 capture and then storage in underground repositories, allegedly safe forever, but lethal if they leaked at any rate of knots. So this post points to 5 areas where captured CO2 could be put to work. 1. As a building material, essentially creating synthetic limestone. 2. As a fertiliser in greenhouses to increase the productivity of plants, a bit like the urban tree effect we just discussed. 3. Plastic production. This is promising in that CO2 replaces half the oil used in the production of plastics. We still end up with plastics, but we're using less oil. 4. Gas production. Ancient archaea bacteria will take the CO2 and produce methane for burning. This one I like, a sort of closed loop, with possible animal feed from the archaea bacteria as a byproduct. And finally, baking soda. This is a process developed in India and actually at work in the real world. What we do with the large amounts of baking soda is another question, but I'm sure that's more easily resolved than weaning the world off fossil fuels. There is hope as I try to keep in the forefront of my mind. Will the changes we need come quickly enough? I certainly hope so. Another line of attack on the CO2 front is sustainable agriculture. From the blog, Ecology is not a dirty word, comes the post, what is sustainable agriculture anyway? Indeed, a fair question. The point of this blog is to define the term sustainable. They lay out a number of terms and cover industrial, that is monocultural agriculture, through the permutations of organic, permaculture, biodynamic, holistic, regenerative and agroecology. I would recommend you read the whole article, as it is good to return to first principles occasionally to refresh the focus. So to follow on from those first principles and the urban focus this week, we conclude with a post from the blog Capacloud, entitled, How One Can Develop a Vertical Garden in Simplest Way. Now, this is a blog designed to sell vertical gardens in India by a manufacturer of vertical gardens, but it has much to recommend it. If we apply the idea of vertical gardening hand in hand with the increased urban tree growth, then a perennial food forest becomes a reality. The idea of providing food, shade, pollinator support and material for compost, all where people live, appeals to me. It not only increases food sovereignty locally, it further reduces the need for fossil fuels in transport. It also connects people directly with their food. And ownership of your food production as in responsibility for trees becomes a personal thing. When food is personalised, or anything else for that matter, individuals step up and take responsibility for the care of those trees. A noble calling indeed. Reintegrating trees into our cultures, societies, locales and homes will be of benefit to ourselves, the trees, our homes, locales, societies and cultures. Let us become once again a tree-connected species. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode. A transcript is available at the blog worldorganicnews.com. Thank you for listening. I'll be back at the same time next week.